From the archives of the great library of Arathes, Golden City of Elves, the wise scholars of Grey Sage present the unlikely and highly questionable accounts from those who were avowed witness. These are the suspenseful investigations of the human, Fraenk Neversleep, Arch-Preceptor of Blackroot. And now, the Neversleep Scrolls, Circle of the Mind Thief, written by Philip Walton. The story continues. Chapter 16. Chapter 16. "You're wrong! This necklace is cursed!" Fraenk exclaimed. "Oh, wait, that's what you said." They both watched as the frost quickly turned to beads of moisture on Frank's hand in the afternoon heat. There was something in Dandrikan's reaction Fraenk had not expected, a sort of awe. And for someone who had a wild confabulation for not only himself but every wondrous trinket in his shop, this was quite unusual. He was not sure what to make of the dealer's response, but hopefully it was a positive development. They could at least dispense with the jousting over whether the necklace was magical or not. "Well, what is it?" Fraenk thrust the pendant forward and Dandrikan immediately stepped back from the counter. He looked scared to touch it. Fraenk immediately wondered if it was safe for himself to be handling it, but it was too late for caution now.
It's...
Dandrikan was in awe. He shook his head as if to clear it.
It's very cursed, is what it is.
Fraenk laid it out on the blue velvet cloth. Just sitting there it looked flat and boring, but Fraenk knew that was part of its magic. "I've got that much at least," Fraenk said impatiently. "I mean, have you ever seen its like before? Who made it? What does it do?" Dandrikan looked flustered by all the questions.
I don't know, Fraenk. It's not like anything I've ever encountered.
He turned and rummaged below the counter. A moment later he produced a huge, dusty, leather-bound tome with iron locking straps across it. He thumped it down and unlocked it with a key he had around his neck.
The Arcanum Maledictum may have it catalogued. Let's see here.
Dandrikan flipped through page after page of assorted items that appeared innocent enough, but were apparently inflicted by insidious dark magic. Fraenk had not seen this book in his previous visits, and now he wanted more than anything to have a copy of his own to study at his leisure. A chair that eats whoever sits in it, and a spoon that makes its user ever hungrier? These are dastardly, Fraenk whispered. Dandrikan flashed an annoyed glare at his professional secrets being divulged. He flipped faster so Fraenk would have trouble prying. Dandrikan stopped suddenly at a dog-eared page, and there it was. The page bore an ink and watercolour illustration that seemed to struggle to capture the jewellery's true likeness. Understandable, Fraenk supposed, since the item's charm probably prevented someone from faithfully recalling any detail with which to render it. Large lettering at the top identified the item.
The headsman's mistress.
Dandrikan read aloud.
Ooh, this is a real nasty one you got here, Fraenk.
Go on, then, Fraenk urged, and Dandrikan continued down the page.
Let's see. Origin. Commissioned by Lord Nishwain Magjaw, the Green. The necklace was originally intended to be a gift to his favourite concubine, but upon discovering her infidelity to him, he had it cursed to...
Dandrikan paused for dramatic effect. Fraenk knew this was part of the theatrics. Whatever had flustered the dealer earlier was now gone, and he was back in smooth salesbroker mode. What does it say? Fraenk urged, playing his own part.
Slice the head from the shoulders of its wearer with a single command.
Dandrikan looked up at him.
You haven't tried it on, have you?
No, Fraenk said, touching his neck, visibly relieved. So, did he use it on her?
Mercifully, she never wore it. Lord Major's scheme was discovered by a heroic paladin.
Dandrikan paused to make a sour face, indicating his feelings toward this particular hero or his profession in general.
And the evil lord was summarily executed. But it says that he went to his grave, never revealing the secret command which would trigger the wearer's beheading.
Dandrikan screwed up his face in a pantomime of empathy.
Oh, it goes on to say the necklace did change hands many times over the years, and unfortunately did have several other unintended victims, as these poor, unsuspecting women wore it out in public. The secret command would be accidentally spoken in conversation by someone in the crowd, and whoosh, off with her head. Which is how this loathsome charm earned its name. How awful!
Dandrikan was doing a poor job masking his delight in the sordid details. And no one remembers the specific command? Fraenk ventured.
Tragically, no. It ends by saying the headsman's mistress was finally turned over to the arcane lords in Coron. It is supposed to still be under their watch, but obviously someone else got their hands on it.
Dandrikan narrowed his eyes suspiciously.
So how did you get this gem, Fraenk?
Found it on a headless body near the docks, Fraenk replied evenly, but we had no suspects, so...
Ah, of course.
Dandrikan's tone and expression said he didn't believe Fraenk, but didn't call him on the lie either. Does the book say anything else about it? Secondary effects? Fraenk asked. Dandrikan made an exaggerated show of rereading the page. He shook his head.
No, there's nothing.
What about the frost? Fraenk countered.
Other than the chill frost which precedes an activation.
Dandrikan added quickly. Lucky me, I almost lost a couple of fingers, Fraenk mused. So no other enchanted effects? I just want to make sure it hides no other surprises.
Misfortune follows the longer anyone possesses it. That's everything it says in the book, Fraenk,
Dandrikan said, folding it back shut again as if to conclude that the matter itself was closed. Fraenk noticed sunlight flicker off the gem in the gold ring on Dandrikan's pinky finger. It was one of several jewelled ornaments the man wore. Dandrikan seemed the type to keep his most magical and valued items on his person. How many of these trinkets had little tricks of their own? So, how much? Fraenk asked. You buy this kind of unholy dross, right?
What? Eventually come looking for it, he replied defensively. Sorry, Fraenk. It's dangerous. And if the arcane lords don't know it's missing already, they'll have...
He replied defensively. That's everything you sell, Dandrikan. You're already wearing enough contraband that they'd send you to that special prison for warlocks. Dandrikan stepped backward, clasping his hands in front of the belt with the cloud patterns on it. Then he smiled.
Well, in Tigran, they'd just hang me. Anyway, I'm not interested.
All right. So the necklace isn't worth anything. What if I gave it to you? Fraenk pressed. What if I paid you to take it away?
I can't help with this, but I'm warning you not to hang on to it either. It's a heavy anchor on your neck, and you're running out of chain. You have to get rid of it.
For maybe the first time in their conversation, Dandrikan looked genuine and concerned. Fraenk nodded, then quickly picked up the necklace and slid it back into his inner pocket. All right. Thanks for your help, Fraenk said, and clacked several silver coins down on the counter. For your trouble and your learned expertise. He turned to the door and was just about to push outside when it finally came, the final step in the brokering dance. It had to come at the very end. One remote possibility for an offer too hard to resist.
Fraenk, wait.
Dandrikan called out like he suddenly had a bolt of inspiration.
I can't guarantee it, but I think I know someone who might buy the necklace.
You do? Fraenk turned back, showing hope on his face.
There's a certain collector. I need to speak with him first, but he's into all kinds of twisted arcana. This might be something he would want.
You'll speak to him and get word back to me? Fraenk tried to keep his tone interested but not eager.
It's best if we keep this between as few parties as possible, Fraenk. You understand? Just come back with it the day after tomorrow. I'll get him here so he can see it with his own eyes.
Dandrikan tapped his lip.
Now that I think on it, if he is interested, and I'm not promising he will be, but if he is, we might be able to take a nice stack of gold from him in the exchange.
Yes, Fraenk thought. Here was the old familiar Dandrikan that he knew and nobody else loved. The moment he was out of eyeline from Dandrikan's plague house, Fraenk ran. He fully expected the unscrupulous dealer to lie to him about the item in question, which he did. The necklace illustrated and described in the book was not the same as the one in Fraenk's possession. Its appearance and effects were all different, and there was no mention of its aversion to attention. In fact, Dandrikan appeared to be ready for such an inquiry. The dog-eared page of the Arcanum Maledictum was marked beforehand as a likely misdirection. Its select purpose, Fraenk reasoned, was to make it undesirable and of little value to him, not to mention scaring Fraenk from attempting to try it on. He also anticipated Dandrikan would try to contrive a way for Fraenk to rid himself of the cursed item and make himself as the reluctant recipient. Dandrikan skillfully added the hint of jingling coins to appeal to greed or recoupment of any money Fraenk spent on the necklace's acquisition. This too came as no surprise. What caught Fraenk off guard was the man's clumsy attempt at a trap. Dandrikan's final invitation to come back alone with the necklace in hand, expecting to return home with a fat coin purse, was indeed laughable. The twisted fool must have forgotten the time he elaborated to Fraenk on this very scheme, where he hired goons to waylay a greedy mark who thought he was coming to sell an enchanted painting that made all its viewers think fondly of their mother. Dandrikan must really want the necklace if he would resort to such desperate measures, and considering who Fraenk was and what he was capable of, he had to imagine that this unfortunate encounter would necessitate Frank's untimely death as a result, lest he seek revenge. Dandrikan would insist upon not having any loose ends. Of course, all that was a series of leaps on the slippery stones in the river of logic. Dandrikan had always treated him warmly as a friend. It was possible that Fraenk was being extremely paranoid, an understandable reaction given his job and recent misadventures. Perhaps Dandrikan had earned enough goodwill over the years to receive the benefit of the doubt. But there was one last thing that kept Fraenk from dismissing this incident as a distrustful misunderstanding. When Fraenk had picked up the necklace for the second time to put it away, he could swear that he could, for lack of a better expression, feel Dandrikan's overwhelming avarice and desire to take the necklace. Just grab it right out of Frank's hand. There was also a secondary, more rational drive in the man's mind that kept the first one in check. Dandrikan's yearning for the necklace was the same Fraenk felt when he spent 2 days without a drink. It was an urge almost unbearable, something a man would do nearly anything to quiet, including betray a friend. He was done with Dandrikan. As he made his way back across the Fernbrook District, Fraenk noticed something odd. The soldiers who were previously absent on his way to the plague house now seemed to be out in full force. Fraenk did not want to conflate every disadvantageous event, explained or no, directed at himself personally. But this did seem unusual. Initially, Fraenk was worried that somehow Dandrikan raced to the Fernbrook guards and alerted them to his presence, triggering a district-wide manhunt for their sworn enemy. But logic failed for that explanation for several reasons. The unscrupulous dealer avoided the Fernbrooks, and he certainly wouldn't want them to take Fraenk into custody while he had the necklace in possession. Another possibility was that they were looking for the ill-tempered, hell-touched man, but somehow he doubted that was the case. The demon blood seemed to have an uncanny knack of avoiding detection when it suited him. But then what other explanation remained? Fraenk spied a cluster of guards standing around ahead, blocking his most direct exit. He veered onto a side street. There were other routes. He found 3 other avenues with a contingent of guards or armsmen bearing Greenbrier sigils. Fraenk was running out of clear paths out. He was close to the border, though, just a little further. When he had to double back from his second-to-last way due to the sudden appearance of a guard post right on the district border, his suspicions seemed confirmed. For safe measure, Fraenk stole drying laundry from an unwatched backyard and updated his disguise to look more like a rather unremarkable workman. He quickly wove through a thinning crowd. There was one last crossing that ran beneath the wide ox-cart bridge that spanned the industrial sectors of Blackroot and Fernbrook. It was never guarded because the local vagrants who lived down there would run any authority figure off, starting with thrown insults and moving quickly to projectiles of a more intestinal production. As he made his way ever closer to being home free, Fraenk was definitely convinced something foul was going on in Fernbrook District. But how could this be about him? No one else knew he was even here. No one except Nim. No, it couldn't be. Fraenk had just stepped into the shadow of the bridge when 5 figures emerged from behind the pylons. They were all wearing silver chainmail and had tall spears, with the distinctive circle sigil of Fernbrook on their chest. All of them, except the elf in the middle, who wore a long dark cloak and the silver pin of the Arch-Preceptor.
"Hello, Arch-Preceptor Neversleep,"
he said, a smile curling like the savage grin of a fox moving in for... Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another exciting episode. And remember, the learned scholars of Greysage caution you that the veracity of these events remains unproven. Now go safe in the light of the powers, until our hands clasp again.